let's just jump right into it. When world leaders get up to speak to one another, they're not just reading off a list of dry facts. They are carefully weaving these complex narratives. So in this explainer, we're unpacking the absolutely brilliant rhetorical strategies King Charles III recently used when addressing U.S. leaders. We're going to look at how a head of state can take literally centuries of historical tension, like actual wars, and masterfully use that exact friction to build a profound sense of modern unity. I mean, right off the bat, the king drops this massive icebreaker. He says, "We British, of course, made our own small attempt at real estate redevelopment of the White House in 1814. Talk about totally disarming a room. The guy's literally standing in front of U.S. leaders, casually bringing up the time British forces set fire to the White House. But by framing this huge historical conflict as just a, small attempt at real estate redevelopment, he uses this surprising, self-deprecating joke to completely win over the audience. It's a perfect example of how world leaders can take a moment of intense historical friction and just wield it as a highly effective diplomatic tool. So, to really get the so what of this speech, we need to talk about diplomatic rhetoric. This is way more than just being polite. It's the highly strategic use of language by political leaders to navigate international relations. And what's absolutely crucial for us today is that second part, often deliberately acknowledging past conflicts to emphasize the strength of a modern alliance. Because actually, instead of just sweeping the ugly parts of history under the rug, diplomatic rhetoric pulls them right out into the light to say, hey, look how far we've come. And that concept, that's going to set the stage for our entire breakdown here. All right, moving into section 1, the royal icebreaker, leveraging historical friction. Let's see how the king uses this tactic to establish rapport right out of the gate. What's truly fascinating here is how the king invokes his own ancestry. He actually brings up King George III. Yep, the exact monarch the American colonies fought their bitter Revolutionary War against. It would have been so incredibly easy to just avoid mentioning him entirely. But instead, Charles uses his status as a direct descendant of that specific king to validate and complement the American character. He's essentially saying, look, my family knows firsthand your courage, your tenacity, and your spirit of adventure because, well, we were the ones you defeated. It is just an incredibly clever rhetorical slip. And you really have to watch the chronological jumps the speech makes. The king doesn't just hang out in the past. He starts 2.5 centuries ago with the audacious founding of the U.S. Then he fast forwards to the conflict of 1814, and then anchors us right up to today's unbreakable, indispensable alliance. By mapping out these historical milestones like this, he creates a real narrative journey. He's showing the audience that the relationship wasn't always easy, which in turn makes the modern-day alliance feel earned. It makes it feel resilient and, honestly, virtually unbreakable. Okay, on to section 2, a map of history, the geography of an alliance. This is all about how shared geography proves our deep historical interconnectedness. Just think about the sheer volume of British influence on the American East Coast for a second. We're talking North and South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Charleston, Georgetown, Georgia, Annapolis, Prince William County, Williamsburg. The king lists these off, but what makes it so brilliant is his delivery. He humorously likens this massive list to his family's, quote, Christmas card list across the ages. It completely humanizes the geography. It takes what is basically a list of colonial namesakes and turns them into this warm symbol of an enduring family connection. So pointing out these shared names isn't just a fun little geography lesson. It is a highly deliberate rhetorical choice. These locations serve as permanent geographic reminders of our shared history. Every single time an American looks at a map of the East Coast, they are essentially looking at the shared heritage between the two nations. By pointing this out, the king is verbally and geographically binding the two nations together in the minds of his listeners. Next up is section 3, the French connection, strategic diplomatic banter. Let's look at how the speech playfully brings a third historic ally and, let's be honest, historical rival into the narrative. This part just brilliantly illustrates the use of contrasting humor in diplomacy. The king references a previous comment made by the U.S. president, who joked that if it weren't for the U.S., European countries would be speaking German. Well, the king fires right back with this cheeky reminder of British intervention. He says, "Dare I say that if it wasn't for us, you'd be speaking French." I mean, that is high-level diplomatic banter right there. It acknowledges those deep historical rivalries between Britain, France, and America, but it packages the whole thing in a way that just feels like close friends teasing one another. But of course, you can't just leave a joke like that hanging when you're dealing with international allies. Notice how quickly this speech resolves this banter.
He immediately pivots to reinforce that they all love their French cousins greatly, uniting what he calls the three estates. He really grounds the joke by reminding everyone that the US, the UK, and France are bound by fundamental shared values. So he transitions seamlessly from poking fun to a very serious declaration of solidarity, stating that together they are way more than just the sum of their parts. All right, Section 4, Adversaries to Allies, the ultimate resolution. This is really the overarching narrative arc of the entire address, transforming past enemies into vital partners. The crucial point here is captured in this really stark juxtaposition. Listen to the language he uses for the past. Out of the fires of a bitter and bloody Revolutionary War. He isn't sugarcoating it at all, is he? He explicitly acknowledges the violence and the bitterness. But then, listen to the present reality, reconciliation from adversaries to the closest of allies. By actively reminding the audience of exactly how dark the past was, he actually magnifies the light and the strength of the current relationship. That contrast is exactly what gives this rhetoric its incredible power. And that leads us to a truly defining moment in the speech. He says ours is an unbreakable bond of history and heritage, culture and commerce, industry and invention, and we are determined to face the future together. Now, before delivering this line, the king specifically celebrated the triumph of George Washington and the founders forging a democracy based on liberty and the rule of law. Think about that for a second. He uses those shared democratic foundations, the exact ones built by rebelling against his own crown, to anchor the modern unbreakable alliance. Now, words are nice, but diplomatic rhetoric absolutely needs to be backed by action to be truly effective. So the king details exactly how this indispensable alliance operates today. They've fought and fallen together to defend shared values. They've traded, innovated, and created together. They've stood together through the absolute best and worst of times. By laying out these very concrete actions, the speech proves that the alliance isn't just some pleasant idea floating around. It is a tangible cornerstone of prosperity and security that's been actively maintained over a long period of time. So let's ground ourselves in the core concept pulling all of this together, and that's reconciliation. It's the restoration of friendly relations. But crucially, the speech frames this reconciliation as a journey that, frankly, doesn't always follow the straightest path. I mean, history's messy. There were wars, there were fires, there were bitter rivalries. But the absolute rhetorical genius here is framing that messy, crooked path of history as the very forge that created the secure, indispensable alliance the two nations enjoy today. Well, that brings us to the end of our analysis, and I really want to leave you with this provocative question to chew on. How does deliberately acknowledging a deeply divided past help secure a more united diplomatic future? It seems totally counterintuitive, doesn't it? You would think leaders would want to just ignore the times they fought each other. But as we've seen in this explainer today, owning the friction, using self-deprecating humor, and highlighting the journey from adversaries to allies, that is what makes a diplomatic bond feel truly unbreakable. It is a literal masterclass in turning historical baggage into a powerful diplomatic asset. Thanks for joining me, and definitely keep this strategy in mind the next time you hear world leaders take the stage.